Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to At Your Own Pace.
When you're first starting out, it's gonna be hard. That doesn't mean that you don't belong there.
I can do whatever, and it's just me being a ridiculous dad that wants to do some good in the world.
I can do this, I am going to do this, and I will do this.
If you're an early morning, 4 a.m. alarm person to get your run in, or you're like me who likes to sleep in and so you'll run at 7 p.m. Either way, it's hard, and I'm going to cheer for you, get to your goals. And if you don't, I'm going to be the shoulder for you to lean on as well.
It's forced me to get myself uncomfortable. And I think I've started to get that comfort with the uncomfortable.
Don't I deserve a chance to be happy and not beat myself up over a bad run?
In more ways than one, running probably saved my life.
I'm Mike from Mike Runs Marathons, and I believe that running has the power to change how we see ourselves, how we show up in the world, and how we connect with each other. At Your Own Pace is a place for honest conversations about growth, resilience, identity, and the courage it takes to keep moving forward when things feel hard or uncertain. Every guest who comes on this show brings a story that reminds us that we're not alone in our journey and that you don't need a PR, a podium, or a perfect training plan to belong here. You just need the willingness to keep showing up. Now, today's guest is someone who I greatly admire and someone whose podcast I actually was on myself and someone who inspired me to create this podcast. And is someone who brings something incredibly special to the running world that I think is so important to everybody. Celebration, joy, and community. If you follow Ali Brettnacher_runs, you'll see that running for her isn't about miles or finish times. It's about the people that you meet, the stories that you collect, and finding a way to make running feel meaningful and fun for everyday runners. She's the host of Finish Lines and Milestones, a podcast that lifts up real stories from runners of all backgrounds, and the creator behind Athlete Boutiques, celebrating accomplishments in really thoughtful ways. So I'm really excited to talk about how she balances the running with just life's chaos in general, why community matters so much, and how she handles the setbacks and how she keeps the joy alive, even when running doesn't necessarily feel fun at times. So without further ado, let me bring in Ali. Hey, Ali, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
Of course. How have you been?
Good. New year always gets me really amped up.
For those of you that don't know Ali, she runs Finish Lines and Milestones, an incredible podcast where she highlights so many really powerful runners of all backgrounds, finish times, and is a wonderful person herself. So if you are not listening to her podcast already, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to it on any podcast platform that you use. I guarantee you will not be disappointed. But
thank you.
So, Ali, the way that I have this set up today is an effort for us to share your own running story and talk about just how important community is for you and also how you deal with the various setbacks that we face as runners, because a lot of people don't necessarily talk about I don't want to say bad times, but the not so great times or the struggles that come up. So I'm really happy to have you on here to talk about that.
Thank you.
Now, your account, it clearly celebrates every runner's story. How did your own running story begin? And how did that shape kind of the way that you share the sport now?
Yeah, so I played sports as a kid, like a lot of people do, but nothing crazy. I wasn't a collegiate athlete. I played soccer through high school, and I hated running. I've heard that story many times with people I've talked to. They're like, I hated the mile warm-up. I would much rather do sprints than run the mile warm-up. But my parents both ran, and they weren't collegiate athletes or anything, but they ran to stay in shape. And it was primarily my mom who was the runner of the family first. And she would do a race in Indianapolis, where I'm from, called the Indy Mini, which is a half marathon and 5K. And she would do it every year. And so I saw her do that. And then my dad started doing it. And then my mom is still very active today, but can no longer run. But my dad has now kind of picked up that baton. And so him and I are really the biggest runners in our family, along with my younger sister runs too. Waiting for my middle sister to get in there. She's probably listened to this. So Casey, you're gonna get in there and run too. But I started running races in 2007 was my first half marathon, which ironically was the Indy Mini.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I got into distance running, if you will, but I was still in college at that time. So it was a while until I actually, upped it to a marathon.
So the Indy Mini I know has a sentimental value for you. I'm pretty sure your parents inspired you to want to do that. What uh, was there anything else that made you want to sign up for that half marathon that stands out to you?
Yeah, actually, it's worth noting too when you talk about running as a punishment. So obviously, I just shared that, in school growing up, like you said, it's punishment running laps. But when I got to college, I went to Miami of Ohio in good old Oxford, Ohio, and it was a desire to maintain my weight. So it was more of a, vain type of thing. I would punish myself on the treadmill for drinking beer the night before, right? And so it's interesting, my relationship with running and that inspiration to start was not necessarily a good relationship with running at the beginning. So I think that's worth noting because I know a lot of people, not just women, have dealt with that. But that's really what I would literally go to the gym at school and run on the treadmill, read textbooks on the treadmill. And yeah, it was a lot. And I didn't really do races then. So it was pretty much just pure punishment, which people listening are probably like, geez, but that's where it started.
How did that mentality shift to it being something about community and about wanting to do it for the love of the sport?
Yeah, I think the whole idea of finding community is a lot about where it shifted. I mean, of course, I went through, a relationship with running and food and drinking in college that wasn't healthy. And then after graduating, kind of getting into the real world, being motivated to be successful, then things started to shift. And that's really where I started having a healthier relationship. I built relationships with friends who were runners. And, out of that, I had this group of women that I would run with. We called ourselves the Accidental Runners. And it was just kind of a hodgepodge group of us that every year would do a race somewhere different. And so finding people like that really helped me shift that to being more fun and more about community and challenging myself, but not in a way that was hurting myself.
Yes, absolutely. As I think as runners, sometimes the we have the unfortunate capability of not knowing when we push ourselves too hard until we get there. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you're able to find that balance because it's a delicate line to walk. When I first started running, there was at least once every 2 or 3 months, there was at least a week where I had to take off because something would happen to one of my knees.
Mm,
And I just considered it like this is just something that happens to runners until I did more research and I learned about like what I was doing wrong and what I needed to fix.
yeah.
Now, you talked about how you used running as a punishment and you ran while reading textbooks. Now, looking at it differently with this new relationship you have with running, being able to balance running with life in general, work, relationships, family, training, how do you decide what your day looks like when it comes to your running?
Yeah, this has definitely changed over seasons of life, right? So before I was a mom, when I had a more traditional quote unquote career where I was in an office every day, I'd get up at 4 in the morning or whatever time I would need to get in the miles. I remember running 15 miles before work, and then just go and sit in my cubicle being like, man, I wish I could tell somebody about this, the fact that I ran 15 miles before work. But these days, I've transitioned and I don't have a traditional 9 to 5 job. I get to do this as my job, quote unquote, right? I'm also a mom of 2 young kids. My husband is in corporate America and has a great career, which allows me really the flexibility and freedom to do this along with the career that I had myself. And so now I can plan my day really however I want, which I feel so, so lucky because people listening who have a traditional job, right? And they've got to figure out if they're training for a marathon, how to fit it in on the weekend or before work, that can be really challenging. So for me, I typically will work out mid morning or mid afternoon, just kind of depending on what else is on my schedule for the day. But I do start at the beginning of the week. I look at all the workouts my coach has given me and I kind of look to see where I'm going to put it in. Like, I'm like, oh, I have a doctor's appointment on Friday when I'm supposed to do my long run. So I'm going to need to switch that around this week as an
Okay.
example. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. So I want to jump to just discussing your podcast. I've listened to it for several months since I discovered you last year when I like first started to get involved in the running community with the Finish Lines and Milestones. What was the spark for creating that show? We talked about community, but what else helped shape the way that you put that together?
So I had started Athlete Bouquets, which is a run gifting business, like think edible arrangements for runners. I had started that while I was pregnant with my second kid. I had quit my job without having another job and had a hard time sitting still. So I had the idea for that. So that came first. And the tagline for that business was celebrating finish lines and milestones. At the time, it was COVID. And so there weren't a lot of physical, real finish lines being celebrated. And so the milestones came in really because of Peloton, actually, which I know you
Mm,
love as well. Because I'm like, well, I'm celebrating a lot more milestones with Peloton
yes.
than I am like finish lines. And so I put those two together and was like, that's what this business is about. We're celebrating finish lines and milestones. And then, through that, I just was meeting so many people online, in person, and in my own running community here. And I've been a big fan of Lindsay Hine for a long time. Lindsay Hine has a podcast and a podcast network, and she's been doing it for a decade. And so I don't know, I just kind of was like, maybe I could do that. I was just meeting so many people. I'm like, these stories should be shared. I'm sure you feel the same, right? It's like there's so many stories. You're like, people need to hear these stories from the non-pros, people just like you and
Yes.
me who are just doing amazing things. And so I I remember just being like, I'm such a perfectionist. So it took me a while to, finally get it together and hit publish for the first time. But, then that's kind of where it began. So this April, it'll be 3 years. And before I forget, your episode was 113. So people who are listening should go listen to your episode of my podcast
Yes.
if
I
they
think
enjoyed
you
this episode, I guess.
I think you were so I was on a podcast with Run Try Bike very briefly at
Yes.
the beginning of the year. I think it may have been February or so. But I think you were like, if we want to talk like official like podcasts, in like the podcast format, I think you were the very first podcast that I was ever on. So
Yay.
it was new to me, but it was an honor that you let me be on the show because I never really had been able to share my running story with like a broad community before, and to be able to do that and then have individuals, whether they commented on the episode or they followed me or commented on my posts and saying that they identified with something that I said. It was like an absolute like privilege to be able to get that, and I was filled with so much gratitude. So I want to thank you for letting me be that episode.
Absolutely.
And I had so much fun. That's why as soon as I started this podcast, I was like, I gotta have Ali on here. She's a phenomenal person. She's so easy to talk to, and like you pointed out, community is so important, and
Hmm.
the stories of those everyday runners needs to be shared because you like just for instance, I'm pretty sure you saw I was doing a giveaway for a sports watch,
Hmm.
and I put as one of my questions within the Google form that everybody filled out of tell me your why. Why do you want this watch? And some of the stories that I saw were so inspiring that I had to reach out to a couple people who didn't win and be like, listen, you didn't win, but I still want to help you in some
Hmm.
way,
Yes.
whether it's training or some other thing, because of just like how powerful they can be and how I know that they need to have their stories elevated because so many other people probably might be going through something similar, and seeing somebody push through and be able to make progress and kind of come out of it on the other side as a better, a stronger person is something that I think our community really needs and will keep, for example, new runners like in the sport
Hmm.
because as we pointed out at the beginning, it can really suck.
Yes.
Now, with your content, we talked about community and how your content really highlights that. So, whether it's like sharing a reel or when you're running with friends or you're celebrating other achievements or milestones, I'm glad that you brought up Peloton because I
Yeah.
absolutely adore it.
Yeah.
What does that community look like to you? What does it mean when it comes to running?
Gosh. I mean, it's interesting because I've seen posts where people are like, if you couldn't share about your marathon, would you run a marathon? And part of me is like, well, yeah, I'll probably still run it. But like half of it is really being in the trenches with your community, sharing what you're going through or what you're excited about, your successes, what's hard. And so I think that's community to me is part of it's just so motivating.
Yes.
Knowing that other people are out there who feel the same way or going through the same kinds of training cycles or whatever it might be, it's great to have that community of people who support you. And, I'm lucky to have that on the internet virtually somewhat. And then in person with the community that I've, almost accidentally built. I didn't really think about the fact that when I started a podcast, that would kind of build a group of these people who have been on my podcast, who now, especially locally, will get together at a race and people will be standing around and be like, oh, I was episode 17. What episode were you? And it was just really awesome to see and like have that bring people together too. So it's really everything when it comes to running, because without the community, like if I was just doing it in a vacuum by myself, like I'm self-motivated, but it just wouldn't be the same, right? I think you understand that too.
Do you have a story that I know that's kind of me putting you on the spot, but is there any story from someone else's running journey that kind of changed the way that you think about your own?
Gosh, yeah, that is putting me on the spot because if people listening, I don't want people to think that their story didn't do that to me too, because there's been so many. I want to say there's two. One I'll mention especially because he was the first guest on your podcast, Alex Baker. So he lives where I live. And I can't remember how I got connected to him, but he was episode number 6. And I remember meeting him and thinking, I told him I was really nervous. I said, Alex, I'm so nervous. I don't know how to talk about this really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you said that at the beginning of your episode with him. You're like, this is it's hard to talk about, but let's talk about it, because it's those kinds of stories that, even though they're so hard to talk about, they really, it's helpful for those listening to, understand what people are going through and what motivates them and what helps them. And so that was a really big one for me, because it was really the first person I interviewed that I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone up until that point I knew. And so he was my first stranger and my first really I don't know, call it like a traumatic type of story. And I've shared others. The other one that comes to mind is my friend Eileen Poor. She was episode 17, still the most listened to episode of this podcast by far. She's been through hell and back, hell and back, and hell and back. This woman there is a fire within her heading into this year, that's for sure. But she's been through a lot, and she's really become such a dear friend of mine, which is, again, something I didn't really necessarily expect that would come out of this. And so I feel really fortunate now that I've, made such a great friend as a part of it too. But her story was just really incredibly inspiring.
Awesome. Make sure everybody, if you listen to her podcast, that you check out those 2 episodes. I mean, and shout out to Alex, because that his story it's a difficult one to hear because it's so personal and it's filled with a lot of grief, but what he's trying to do out of that is so inspiring.
Yes.
For what he's trying to push for. And if you're not following him at Catch Up to Cancer, he's doing a virtual 5K to raise funds for St. Jude's for his charity for London.
Mm-hmm.
Now I want to jump into the ugly part of running, the setbacks, being honest about the struggles and that balance that we talked about. You've been open about, shifting racing plans, injuries that might come up. How do you handle those moments of adjustment without losing confidence? Because I can tell you from my own experience, if I have I had surgery, I was out of commission for 2.5 weeks. And I literally felt like when I started running again, I was back at day one of just when I first started.
Yes. Yeah. So I've been pretty lucky when it comes to injuries in particular. I had a stress fracture in college, which you could probably imagine why. I was, running myself into the ground. But what I've had to deal with at times has been sickness, like getting sick during a training cycle, during those important runs that you're like, oh my gosh, I missed that run. How could I possibly catch back up and continue to gain fitness? And that actually happened to me before Marine Corps this past October. I was on fall break in early October and got sick after that. And I was thinking, okay, what, how, you're kind of in the taper at that point, but also you're like, well, I still need to be I can't be sick. So that was really unnerving. One of the great things about having a coach is having somebody with the expertise to know hey, I've had runners in this situation before. You can miss this run and everything's going to be okay. Whereas I have my brother-in-law who will miss a long run and literally change which marathon he's registered for.
Goodness. Wow.
Yes.
Talk about dedication.
Yeah. He's like, nope, I missed this run. I don't feel, so there, I've been fortunate enough to where, I just also haven't put so much pressure on the finish time. Now, I am chasing Boston, so there will be races in my future where I am chasing a specific time. But, situations like Marine Corps, when I'm doing a race with an organization like Ainsley's Angels, where I'm pushing someone else so they can have that experience, that becomes not about the finish time. But I will say I really struggled with my nerves at that race, which was so surprising to me because I'm like, I'm not even going for a time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was because I was worried about whether or not I could do it. And now it wasn't just about me, it was about somebody else that needed to get to the finish line. So, and there's been times where, I know you and I talked about mental health during your episode. Like there's just been times where running has been a therapy in the darker times of my life. And so those are moments too where, it helps you get through those really tough times. But at times, there's certainly been moments in my life where I've burned myself out and don't want to run, which is why I've actually never done more than one marathon in a year. I tried once. It did not
Really?
work well. Yeah, I once tried to do Chicago and then Philadelphia back to back.
Mm-hmm.
And this is funny. I actually got sick. That's why I didn't do the Philly full. And I did Chicago that year. And then I show up, they're about a little bit more than a month apart. Show up to Philly, and it was with that same group of women I mentioned earlier. And I was so sick. I had no business even running at all. I should have just literally stayed in bed, but I was very stubborn. And fortunately at the time, the Philadelphia Marathon and half marathon were on the same day. And so I could opt literally to go right to go to the finish line or straight to do the marathon. And I just thought, I'm going to go right. Like I literally, the clothes people throw on the side of the road?
Yeah.
I got so cold that I picked up somebody's clothes from the side of the road, put it on. I was like shivering and running. It was just awful. So yeah, there's been moments like that where, you're like, what are you doing? So I opted for the half marathon that day, and it still kind of haunts me, but at the same time, like I knew I did what was best for my body. So
Absolutely. It's funny because I was supposed to run the Philly Marathon and I dipped out like 2 hours before.
That's the one that maybe we both need to run Philly.
Yeah, I've done it before, and it was
Okay.
it was very difficult. I ended up with like incredibly bad IT band issues, but I woke up at like 4 a.m. and I literally was like lying there. I was like, I can't get up. I was like, I can't do this. So I still beat myself up about it because I feel like I could have done a decent time, but my wife tries to tell me we were having some issues with one of your legs, and we don't know what would have happened, and so
Right.
maybe it was for the best. But that kind of segues actually into my next question, which you talked about getting sick and it being kind of the something that can really bring you down when it comes to some of your training runs.
Mm-hmm.
When minus that, when running feels like a chore, when it feels like you have a training run on the block and you're just like, I don't want to do this at all. Like I just want to either rest or do something else, or I'm so busy. What keeps you moving? And what also on the flip side of that, like it gives you permission to actually say, okay, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah. So I would say, kind of back to that community side of things, right? It's like, it's not like I feel like if I didn't run, people would care necessarily, but there's that community of people that has just kind of that underlying motivating factor where I'm like, okay, well, I know that everyone else is out there training to get better. Like I can do that too. I also bribe myself with trash television on my Peloton treadmill. When I'm not feeling motivated, I'm like, okay, well, I'll get on the treadmill and I'll watch something like Love is Blind or like whatever Netflix show I'm into. And that'll get me on there, right? And then get it done. And then I forgot the second half of that question.
Just when you give yourself the permission to actually rest.
Yes. Yeah. That can be really hard at times. But I think being a parent helps a little bit because it's like, well, I need to rest. I can't be sick or injured or, I got to make sure I take care of myself so that I can take care of my family. So that helps, certainly. But I guess as I've matured and just learned about what works for me, I've learned that missing a run or two, it's not going to hurt anything. So that I think helps take off that pressure and just give me the permission to to not do it. So I did that quite a bit during this holiday break. I also got a cold. I mean, I swear
Posting about it, yeah.
this fall was brutal. And I completely ignored whatever my coach had put on my calendar for 2 weeks. Cause I just was like, I'm going to do nothing or what feels good. And that's it. And I'm not going to even look at it. I'm not going to stress about it. I'm just going to listen to my body. I want to feel good. I don't want to, feel worse. So there were a couple times where I tried to run and like sweat it out. And sometimes that's good and sometimes it's not. So, yeah.
When you share that vulnerability and you talk about the tough days and things like that online, how have you found that connects you with the people either in your community or like say followers that you don't necessarily know, more than say like your upbeat like race posts and things like
Right.
that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, being vulnerable about colds and illness is one thing, but I also like to think that I'm an open book about other topics too. So, people when I share stuff about being sick, people are like, "Oh my gosh, me too. Like everyone in my family is sick. This sucks." Like you're kind of commiserating. But I also find like sharing things like, types of anti-anxiety and depressant medications I've tried
Mm,
or taken or what that like mental health again side of things. Like I think being vulnerable about like really vulnerable topics is what really helps the most. And I, frankly, probably don't do that enough, but I am willing to share anything somebody would ask me about. And I do think, you're also a very authentic person online. And I think people just, that's what they want. They don't need people like feeding them bullshit all the time. I mean, it's just, they don't need that. And who wants that? They want people that they feel like they can see themselves in or relate to. And so I just try to be myself as much as I can. So whether that's sharing about how much I'm struggling or like how much I love running certain days or what I'm watching on TV that might be embarrassing, I just really try to be as open as I can.
Do you have? I had someone that I spoke to about this because they have a big following, and I know that they most definitely have runners that connect with what they post. Do you have and they take screenshots of like messages they get from people. Do you have a story or somebody that comes to mind who has personally reached out to you and been like, "Thank you for posting XYZ or sharing this. Like it really helped me in something in my life."
You should know, Mike, I also have a terrible memory, which doesn't help with things like this. What comes to mind more so is about the podcast. Like I've had people like my friend Jason, who is a brain cancer survivor, who's getting ready to run Boston this year. He texted me the other day and he said, "Allie, I just want you to know that because of your podcast, I got connected to somebody else whose family member has the same diagnosis I had. And it's allowed me to connect with them. So thank you." There's a lot of that. Like people will come tell me who they've met or what's happened as a result of kind of the community side of things. There's definitely examples like you described, but I can't think of one off the top of my head.
That's a powerful one. I mean,
Mhm.
you never know who's listening. And I mean, it doesn't necessarily even have to be a runner. It could just be somebody who has dealt with some of the same issues as you. I've had people reach out to me, as you know, I'm open and honest about mental health as well. And they've shared their own stories and things like that. And I'm an open book too. So I have no problem sharing talk about my own issues and what's helped me
Mhm.
get through them. And it's more than just running. So being able to talk about those other things, people tend to find a way to identify in some way, shape, or form. Now, I know you talked about your gunning for Boston, so there's going to be a little bit of focus on certain races when it kind of in the future, but talking about this philosophy of running for fun, I'm thinking back to you running the Marine Corps marathon and things like that, running for a purpose, a charity, or
Mhm.
some sort of cause. How do you keep that alive amid like your goals that you have or your just life in general when it gets busy?
Yeah, yeah. So this is actually where my relationship with my coach comes into play a lot because at the beginning of last year we sat down and we talk about what worked the year before and then what we want to do this year. And so last year I told her, I said, I don't want to PR this year. I would like to continue training like I am going to PR because I want to continue to push myself. But I want this year to be about giving back, about enjoying races, not putting time pressure on myself. And so that's kind of how we looked at the year. And I also am part of Beyond Monumental, which is the organization behind the CNO Indianapolis Monumental Marathon, or I guess I should say CNO Financial Indianapolis Monumental Marathon. Can't get that wrong. And so with those races, I do a lot of volunteering, whether it's at the expo or I haven't paced one of our races yet, but I've paced other local races. That's another way to kind of make it fun and give back to a race, right? Where you still get to be in the race environment, but it's more about helping other people and making it fun for other people, which I get a lot of personal joy out of doing.
Yes.
And then, of course, again, like Ainsley's Angels, like just being like, okay, I'm going to do that. So I do that for the Indy Mini. This will be my third year doing it. And then I did it last year at Marine Corps, but just trying to think about ways to make things fun. Or maybe it's like getting a group of, we have a women's half marathon here that'll be in the fall this year. It's usually in the summer. And so just getting my friends together and running. And it's so fun. Like we're not going for a time, we're just having a blast. Like, so those are some ways, perhaps for people listening who are like, oh, yeah, I am a little burnout on chasing PRs, And the year before that, that was my PR year. I got a PR in my marathon. I worked my ass off to do that. But this year, I still haven't officially decided what I want to do. I turned 40. So there's that magical number that gets me more time for Boston, which is great. But I also found I got a lot of, I don't know, I get a lot of anxiety over building that up and putting that much pressure on myself. So I don't know if I'm ready to go for it. I hope that I'm lucky enough to have time on my side. Like it doesn't, just because seemingly everybody on the internet is running Boston doesn't mean that I have to do it at all, or it doesn't mean that I have to do it right now. So I also try to remind myself of that.
It's a privilege and it's not something that everyone gets to do.
Yeah,
and that's okay.
That's the algorithm.
Exactly. The algorithm can sometimes be your worst enemy when it comes to comparison. But jumping back to the meaningfulness of running, I really want to talk about, it's Angie's Angels is what it's called?
Ainsley's Angels, yeah.
I want to talk about that experience you had in the Marine Corps because one, that's not a difficult marathon. Two, you're pushing a wheelchair. And three, I was just so inspired by that story that you had and the people that you ran with that I want to hear more.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love to talk about it. So I am so lucky. I got to meet Ainsley's dad. He goes by Rooster. He is a Marine, and he started this organization with his wife in honor of their daughter, Ainsley. She was born with a rare genetic disorder, and she was seemingly normal until around the age of 2. And at the time, Rooster was actually deployed overseas in the military when him and his wife found out that she had this rare genetic disorder, and it was ultimately going to take her life. It was just a matter of when. And so they went through that really horrible experience of having a child with that type of diagnosis, also having other children. And they wanted to find a way to give her the best life possible. And so it was a PT friend of Rooster's who was like, hey, have you ever thought about, taking Ainsley on a run? Like that could be a good way to do it. People might know of the names Dick and Rick Hoyt. They kind of started this movement of inclusivity of athletes. And so they heard about Dick and Rick Hoyt and they joined a race with them, with Ainsley. And Rooster just will describe, the look on her face, like the wind on her face. He could tell that experience for her was a good one. And so from that point on, he was like, I was a runner for her. And so they did, I can't remember the number. It was, I think, over 100 races together. And then her last marathon, I think first and last marathons were the Marine Corps. So the Marine Corps is a very important race to the organization. So I should also point out that it's not a bad thing that you say wheelchair, but they do call them, instead of wheelchairs, they call them chariots for what that's worth. And so the chariots, will have athletes of all different abilities. And I've had the ability to push, I've had 4 different athletes that I've pushed over the course of doing the Indy Mini. I did a 5K as well, and then the Marine Corps. And man, I'll just tell you, the first time I did push with Ainsley's Angels at Indy Mini, I was like, I'm never, ever doing this race another way. Like, this is the way I will do this race every year, because it's a race I do every year. This will be my 18th year doing this race. It's nuts. And it's the 50th year. So we're going to have probably over 50 teams, but just for people who kind of are curious about how you do it, like what do you do to be able to do that. Literally, you go to their website, ainsleysangels.org, and you sign up to be part of the community. And when you do that, you tell them kind of where you're located, and then you'll get information about opportunities in your area and otherwise. So I found out about it from a friend. So that's how I got involved. But then, like I said, Marine Corps is a really important race for them. And I had done Marine Corps before with my dad 12 years ago. And the fact that it was the 50th year for Marine Corps, and I had kind of been itching. I did a marathon in 2024, but I was kind of itching to do another one in 2025. And so I signed up to do it. And what people should know is that I signed up to do it by myself. They said, "Hey, are you able to just do it alone? Like, would you be okay with that?" And I said, "Yes." And then I realized that I was not. I got so anxious, like I said, about the idea of getting somebody to the finish line with that responsibility that I reached out to a guy named Rob Perez. He lives in DC locally, and he had been running every day of the government shutdown. He ran the number of days that the government had been shut down, the number of miles. And so on the Marine Corps Marathon, it was going to be 26 miles for him. And so I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, if you're interested, I'm going to be pushing for Team Melissa. Like, if you want to push for a few miles." He also has a huge following and has built a community himself. And so when he said yes, I just was really thankful. And he ended up running the entire marathon with me. So I still have some guilt about, I mean, I had a lot of help doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I pushed probably for less than half of it, but it's still this experience of doing it for somebody else. And Melissa, each time you push an athlete, you get to hear their story. Like, when you meet their family, at the Indy Mini, I usually meet the family the morning of the race. But they usually have a dinner the night before. Same thing at Marine Corps. So I kind of knew in advance and had been emailing with Melissa's mom, but I got to meet her, hear her story, which is a really inspiring one. So, I mean, if you're not sold by now, like, it's like you cross that finish line and it is more emotional than any solo finish line I could ask for. And, 3 out of the 4 young women have been nonverbal that I've pushed. But at the Indy Mini last year, I got to push a teenager. She's a twin and she has Down syndrome.
Mm.
And man, that was a really fun experience. So it's all different types of abilities in athletes, and you just really never know who you're going to meet or be paired with and how their story is going to change you in your running journey. I mean, really, I want to go for they have a Sunset 5K in Louisiana in the summer. That is my 40th birthday weekend. And I'm considering going down there to do that as part of celebrating my birthday and becoming a master runner and just being a part of that organization. So I talked for a really long time there, but I get fired up about Ainsley's Angels. Everybody should do it.
I love that so much. And if you are interested, definitely reach out to Ali. She can get you in contact with who you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
Because wow, that is such a powerful story. Like, that is so incredible of you to do. And sometimes we think it's not that big of a deal, but the impact that you have had on those families and those individuals is priceless. And they will remember that for the rest of their lives. And I'm so proud of you for doing
Thank
that.
you.
It's really inspiring to me. I ran 4 of the World Marathon Majors when I did my first 6-star journey with a charity. And so having that extra kind of reasoning behind why you do it, besides the love of
Yes.
running, you cross that finish line and you're like, whether it's I pushed someone or I was, Achilles Foundation, I ran with somebody,
Right.
or I raised money for some sort of cause or charity or foundation, it makes you feel like you, as they say for people who run Boston with the charity, you're a badass unicorn because
I like that. I actually have never heard that. It's true.
It's funny. I was at right before I ran Boston in 2024, and that was my 6-star. I was at Trader Joe's of all places, and I was wearing something Boston related. And this woman who was like restocking shelves came up to me. She goes, "Are you running the Boston Marathon?" And I was like, "Yeah." She was like, "Oh my God, that's amazing. I ran it. I think it may have been the year before. Did you qualify or how did you get in?" I was like, "Oh, I'm running with a charity." She goes, oh, I did that too. She goes, I'll be right back. She goes in the back. I can't find, I have it somewhere. She had a bracelet that it was blue and gold and it said badass unicorn on it. And she was like, I want you to have this. And I wore that.
Gosh.
I wore that up until after the race. And I was like, I'm going to cry in the middle of this Trader Joe's.
Yeah. Like you're
It was-
making me tear up right now thinking about how cool that is.
It was so powerful. And my wife and I just stood there and we were like, did that just happen? Like
Right.
in the middle of a Trader Joe's? Like it
Yeah.
was so random. And it was I'll never forget that moment. Every time we go back, I'm like, I don't necessarily remember what she looks like, but I'm like, I gotta, like, I purposely sometimes when I go and I wear like something Boston related to be like, maybe she's here still. Cause it's been like 2 years. I'm like, I'm not sure if she still works there. But you know, those moments of connection are just so powerful. And on both sides, like both groups of people don't understand the impact they have on the other people. And I think that that's what makes running so just awesome in general, because you don't know how much your story impacts another person to keep going. And it's one of the reasons that I fell in love with the sport as I started to learn more about charity running and I started to see the impact that it had on people. It was something that like I am so proud of doing and would do again in a heartbeat. Raising the money, not so fun because it's very stressful and difficult.
So hard. Yeah.
But it's at the end, it's all worth it once you get there and you meet the charity and you meet the people. It's really great. So if you've never run with the charity for any race, regardless of what type it is, marathon, 5K, highly recommend doing it. You will feel a sense of fulfillment that is very different than if you were just to cross the finish line after signing up.
Yep.
Now, when it comes to those, you talked about how you ran probably half of the race pushing the chariot, right? And how it can get difficult at times. And I want to go back to, Ali, when she signed up for that first half marathon, the Indy Mini. I know that you saw your parents doing it and you probably saw just, it's not easy. What is we go back to that person, you've kind of tried to turn running into something that is more positive. What is one piece of running advice that you would give yourself that isn't about pace, it's not about mileage, but something about how you feel within the sport?
That no one cares. I loved Laura Green, and I had that mantra as a life mantra before she put it in the running universe. But I think a lot of times we just think like that everybody cares about what we're doing, and you might do it for the wrong reasons as a result, right? Like, oh, I'm doing this because, I want to impress people or whatever. But at the end of the day, nobody really is like watching you and being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe Mike only ran this time at that. Wow, he's probably, people are just want to celebrate you. They want you to be happy. And if they don't, they're not the people for you. They're not people that you should worry about. But I think that for me, I would just be like, yeah, nobody cares. Don't put this pressure on the sport, right? Where where the times matter. I think it's really fun to chase times. I think it's fun to chase your best.
Absolutely.
But the advice I would have is nobody cares. Like, it's not that deep. Just do what makes you happy. Chase what makes you happy and brings you joy and nothing else. Like, don't do anything for anyone else.
Yes. I'm not sure if I read it in a book or I had a therapist tell me, but it's like the number one person who thinks about you the most is yourself.
Yeah.
Like there's nobody else that will think about you in like every aspect of your life more than you will think about yourself. And I had to learn that last year because it was my first time posting running content, and I posted for the love of running, but then part of me was also like, I have to have this like persona of like continuing to inspire people and keep pushing and hitting new goals and all this stuff. And so I remember finishing a race with like, compared to like what other people would normally finish with, was like a really good time. But I literally put this race as a failure. And the amount of people that commented on it being like, what the fuck are you talking about?
You asshole. Like, I run a 2 hours slower than that or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, they were like, are you kidding me? This was
Right.
not a failure. This was like, yeah, you may have hit like a setback in the race, but your time is great. You were consistent. Your pace was good. Like, that's something that I want to aspire to get to. Like, and it felt like I was being a little conceited at that time. And I actually had to put an apology post after, being like, I'm so sorry. I had to check myself and really reflect that you are all correct. I was wrong. And like, in essence, I will never do that again.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment that I was like, you know what? Like, screw what I finish with. I just want to go out there and show people what the sport is about and what we're capable of.
Right. And inside their head, they might be like, good for that guy. It's why do we always put the negative thoughts in somebody's head? I mean, I guess it's because we just do that to ourselves. But in reality, it's just not even close to being the reality of the situation. And it's so refreshing when you start to think that way and put good thoughts in people's heads, give people the benefit of the doubt, and also just know you can do whatever you want and it'll be fine.
Absolutely.
I also think I want to say, Mike, I do think it's okay to be disappointed with your time, even if it's a really fast time that people are like, man, I would give anything to run that. I now have my fast friends, and they'll like be disappointed in their race, even though it was a PR. And you know what? That's okay, because they didn't achieve their goals and they can be upset. But it is funny because you are kind of like, well, you're also really amazing. But I think it's okay. We all have different goals, right? So, I might be disappointed in my 4.5 hour marathon. And for somebody that might be like, wow, well, I would give anything to run that. Whereas like the fast people would be like, man, like, you shouldn't be disappointed. You did it.
Exactly.
So,
I mean, there's that quote where it's like, your worst pace is someone else's best.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Or
So
people would give like your worst day. Somebody would give anything for that day.
Amen.
Yeah.
Now, when you hear that phrase, at your own pace, what does that mean to you right now as a runner, as a creator, as a community builder?
At your own pace to me is like, you do you. Like, live your journey. Like, whatever pace that is, like, you do your pace and I do mine, but we're all in this together. I mean, that's kind of what comes to my mind.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And that you might give the same answer for this, so correct me if I'm wrong, but we talked about giving advice to, past Ali when she first started running. If you could give hopefully another piece of advice to someone who might be listening to this, they're either just starting to run or they're thinking about getting started to run, they feel that judgment. Obviously we have that, no one cares mentality that we can instill in them. But what other type of piece of advice would you give them?
I think people who are starting out and they might be really overwhelmed with what they see on the internet, I think that the internet can be a blessing and a curse. And if you find that you're comparing yourself and it's really making you self-conscious or like second guess what you're doing and it doesn't give you motivation, then you should just not be on it. Like, you've got to understand that, to your point earlier, like 1% of people run marathons, but you're looking at Instagram, it looks like everybody's running marathons. It's just not the case. And so if you're just getting started and you're like excited and you're, in the running algorithm, I would say just be really mindful of what it's doing for you. If it's giving you motivation and inspiration, which I hope it is, like, stick with it. And if it's not, just be cautious and know that, like, think about more what you could build in person, like in your community, getting a coach or joining a run walk club, whatever that looks like. And the other thing I would always say is consistency. Like, it's not going to happen overnight. And again, the internet can do that to you, where it looks like somebody went from 0 to 60, but it's just that you don't see the whole picture. And so you just got to show up, and that consistency will pay off.
You might do it in silence. You might do it on social media, but whatever you do, just keep doing it, and you'll get that. You'll get that aerobic capacity. You'll get the endurance, and you'll be able to actually finish whatever race you set out to do. I don't want to say with ease, but you'll finish and you'll finish smart rather than somebody who is reckless.
Yes.
Hey everybody, before we get into our last segment, I wanted to take a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, and that is For The Run. For The Run is a running apparel company that creates really high quality shirts, hoodies, and everyday gear designed for runners who care about the why they run just as much as they care about how fast or how far they can go. Their clothing is comfortable, durable, and made to be worn on runs, to races, and in everyday life, all while carrying messages that celebrate mental health, community, and personal growth through running. If you're someone who believes running is about more than performance and likes wearing gear that reflects that mindset, For the Run is absolutely worth checking out. You can find them at forthe.run. And if you use the code FTR-Mike Runs Marathons, you can save 10% off your next purchase. All right, now back to Ali. Now, my next segment that I have for you is called the hot seat. So these are just some quick, fun questions that I have top of mind. Don't even think about them, kind of this or that, whatever you think of first answers. So I'll ask these very quickly. Like I said, just whatever comes to mind for this. First question is trail or road?
Road.
What is your favorite running shoe brand right now?
Oh, that's hard. Well, I've just Asics is probably the answer. Yeah.
Mine too. That's mine too. You kind of answered this earlier, but early alarm or a late run?
Well, I'm not a night owl either. But so if I had to pick like late or early, I would probably do early just to get it done. Yeah.
Okay. You talked about the community, but for a long run, do you prefer solo or with others?
With others.
And then for your post-marathon meal, is that something sweet or savory?
It's always both. Milkshake and a cheeseburger, man.
Nice.
That's my jam.
That's it right
Yes.
there?
Yes. Like I'll do that after a long run too.
Do you have a favorite place that you like to go to, or are you just like non-discriminative?
Well, it just depends on where I am. But if I'm local and I have a choice, like I'm going to Steak and Shake is like our Midwest staple. And I love the steak burger and those fries that are like super like shoestring salty, and then the milkshakes are so good. So that's usually what I will get.
Now, on your easy runs, when you're running by yourself, music, podcast, or silence?
I really tend to do all of the above. If I'm by myself, though, usually I'm trying to consume as much content as I can because there's so many amazing podcasts. So it's usually more often than not these days, it's a podcast, but I've gotten better about not using anything too sometimes.
Now, what is one piece of running gear that you can't live without and you can't say your shoes?
My watch, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's probably the same for me. And what is your dream race?
Ooh, oh my gosh. Probably Sydney, Australia, really now. So my oldest daughter is Sydney. That's her name. So I want to take her there. And it would be so cool to be able to do the marathon in that same go because it's obviously very far away. So it won't be for a while because my youngest is 4. So I think dream like bucket list race would be Sydney. I've never done an international race. So there's just so many races that I'm interested in. Like Luxembourg, I studied abroad there. They have a night race there. I'm like, that would be one of the top of my list. I'm not chasing the majors officially. So that gives me, a lot more opportunity, I guess, to just pick where I want to go. And then when is their marathon? That's kind of how I look at it.
Now, with that dream race, if you could run that marathon with anyone, who would it be?
Oh, no. Okay. I mean, shoot, it would probably be Sydney, for goodness sakes. Like, how cool would that be?
Yeah.
My daughter, Sydney, wants to run a marathon at some point, and I can take her to Sydney and we can run the Sydney Marathon. Like, that'd be pretty cool.
I was going to ask, does she have the same kind of love for running that you have?
I've definitely planted the seed, and she is very interested. And it's so interesting. You'll be a parent soon. Having the idea that I want her to love it just as much as I do, but I want to be so careful because I don't want to push it on her. But, the girls, they come out with me to spectate a lot. They've watched me run a lot. And so, yeah, they are interested. And they've both done a mile race we do every year here in the summer. Beyond Monumental puts on a 5K and 1 mile that we do as a family, which is really fun. So she is fast, my oldest. So I think she will, if she wants to be, will be a very talented runner. Yeah. Yeah. My husband ran Chicago with me while we were dating. So
wow.
He had never run more than 3 miles, and he ran Chicago with me. So that was a big, I was like, okay, he's a keeper. But now I can't get him to do another one. I'm trying. I think I'll be able to at some point, but we'll see.
That's a great date. Like, can you imagine being like, oh, what did you and your boyfriend do on your date over the weekend? Oh, Sunday we ran, a marathon,
Yeah,
a lot of fun,
it was great.
no big deal.
Nothing tests a relationship like marathon training, too. I'll tell you that.
I bet. Yeah. Now, this last section that I have is kind of two questions that I ask everybody. The first is information that I collect for what I call the motivation library, so I can share with other runners. And so, if you could pick one quote, a mantra, or some sort of line that helps you get through the tough miles, what would that be?
So I actually asked this at the end of my podcast as well. And it's selfish. It's the exact same thing. I was like, I would love to know what everybody else uses so I can steal some of those and use them for my own motivation. So I have two. The first is run the mile you're in.
Mm.
I think that is the best advice for running and life. And then also you get to do this is my other one. Just a reminder that it's like not everybody can run or has the opportunity to do it. So when it gets hard, I probably should have even brought this up earlier, right? It's like when it gets hard, you are so lucky. It's such a gift to be able to move your body. So those are my two.
It's funny. I've gotten chills multiple times during this conversation. I just got them again because I remember the voice note that you left me for the New York City Marathon.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
And
Yay.
you said the same exact thing to me, both of those quotes. And it was, I think, about halfway through the race. And I was like, at that point, I literally was saying to myself, I'm tired and I'm hungry. And you were like, your words of just like, you're doing great. Be proud of what you're doing. Run the mile you're in. It's okay if you're like struggling. Just remember, just look around you at the crowds and remember that it's so lucky that you get to be here doing this. Um, I remember that voice note, and it was really powerful in that moment. So
I'm so glad.
excellent quotes. And I agree with you wholeheartedly in that. That is a very powerful statement. Now, I want to picture you in the Sydney Marathon running with Sydney in a couple years, and you're getting to the finish line, right? You see the Opera House,
Mm.
like the beautiful finish line is there, and I want to know what song is blasting through your headphones.
Oh, Unstoppable by Sia.
Oh, classic.
Yeah.
I love
Well,
that.
it's so good. And it's like whatever, if it's cliche, I do not care, but it is like my husband plays that for her too. Like that's one of the songs that that they love listening to. So she knows it and loves it. And so that's the first one that comes to mind in that moment. Yeah.
I love that song. I have that song on my running playlist as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's so good.
Yeah, I had on I did a Ragnar with a group of women, and we put one word on the sleeve of our sweatshirts. And so mine was Porsche, like Porsche. I'm a Porsche with no brakes. That was my, instead of unstoppable, I wanted to have it be a word that meant something to me that maybe people wouldn't know necessarily what it meant. So
I love that. I love that. Well, those are actually all of the questions that I had for you today, Ali. I can't thank you enough for being on the show today. I appreciate how you show up for your community, for your podcast, for social media in general, because it is so inspiring for other runners. And, you inspire me to start this podcast. And so your focus on those everyday stories, on celebrating the small wins, on focusing on the mile that you're in, and being honest about the running life, both from a perspective of family, the setbacks that we face when it comes to things like sickness or injuries or whatnot, is exactly what makes this sport more inclusive and inspiring. So if you are listening and you don't already follow her account is Ali Brett, that's 2 L's, 2 T's, _runs. And if you're not already subscribed to her podcast, it is Finish Lines and Milestones. Her content is such a beautiful and incredible and inspiring reminder that running is not about the miles. It's about all of the people we meet along the way, the connections that we make, and the stories that we carry with us. So, Ali, again, I cannot thank you enough.
It was an honor. I had so much fun. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Again, I cannot thank Ali enough for coming on the show today. She has been a huge inspiration for me when it comes to my own running journey with posting running content. She was a huge inspiration for me starting this podcast in the first place. Her story of how she grew from running being this punishment to something that is celebrated and has built such a long lasting community for her is something that I think so many new runners or people thinking about getting into running sometimes forget comes with the sport. We think of running as a solo, go out there, run the trails, run on the road, whatever bike path you're on by yourself. And we don't realize along the way those lasting relationships that we can build or the connections we can make without even realizing it. So again, thank you, Ali, so much for being the embodiment of what this podcast is all about. And I want to thank all of you again for listening and tuning in to At Your Own Pace. You are the reason I make this show, and you are the ones that inspire me to go out there and be the best runner that I can be. And a reminder that whether you're walking, jogging, racing, or just dreaming and thinking about getting started with your running journey, I want you to remember that you belong here at every pace. And until next time, I want you to keep running your story 1 mile at a time at your own pace. And I'll see you in the next one.